We are live.
Okay, thank you. Okay, it is a little after 4, so we'll go ahead and get started with the Community Planning and Transportation Committee meeting for April 22nd, 2021. And in this committee, for those that aren't familiar, every month we get an update about public transit ridership, any other things going on with public transit. We often will be discussing issues of infrastructure related to transportation and community planning, just as the committee title says. So I appreciate anybody that is watching at home, and we'll go ahead and get started with item number 1, which is a ridership report, a public transit ridership report from our city staff.
Thank you, Councilmember Holman. I'm going to go through my memo and talk about the ridership Embark Norman performance report a little bit. I just wanted to clarify real quick. I accidentally sent city clerk, had a glitch in my my memo that I sent. I accidentally had the second page from the previous month on attached to the first page of this month. So I'll get that corrected with her. There really isn't that much difference between the 2 pages, but I want to make sure that that we have that corrected. But just going through it a little bit, I wanted to jump around here for this long range plan update. We're still working with our consultant, Nelson Nygaard, on the remaining tasks, which include a fare analysis, a development guide, the transfer station siting, and ultimately the development of the final draft of the overall plan. We do expect one more public meeting to discuss everything with the public and just go over the different recommendations. And we expect that to happen in the next couple of months before we come to council for approval of the plan. We feel like progress is being made fairly well, and we got a lot of good feedback the last few months, and I appreciate everybody being plugged in. For grants, we're still waiting on the official notice to proceed from OKDEQ for our first battery electric bus. We actually just went to a ribbon cutting for Embark OKC on their CNG facility and battery electric bus. So ours would be actually the second in the state, or we'd be the second transit system in the state to get one if ours come in within the timeline we have for it. But we're starting some preliminary work with the manufacturer. But other than that, we're still waiting on that official notice to proceed from DEQ. We did submit a grant application earlier this month to FTA's 2021 Lower No Emission Vehicle Program. It really funds alternate fuel chargers and CNG stations and CNG vehicles and electric vehicles for transit systems. And we submitted one last year. We didn't make it through the approval process, but we're hoping we can sharpen our pencil this year and get a better response. For the maintenance facility out on North Base, we're making pretty good progress. I hope you have time to drive by sometime on flood. It's getting vertical. You can see the room starting to take shape, the bays starting to take shape. So it's the stuff people like to see that you can see. So we're pretty excited about that. And then I just want to quickly go over bus stop signage. We're still wrapping that project up. We hope it'll be completed install in the next few weeks or a couple months. And our fleet maintenance staff are still working hard, keeping those buses running. Proud to say we've had a good couple of weeks. Parts are coming in pretty well. Our maintenance technicians are doing really well, keeping the buses running. But this is kind of a sweet spot in the year. There's pretty good weather, no highs or lows relatively. So we keep those buses running and they don't work as hard like they do in the extreme weather. For the ridership, March 2021 was a pretty good month for us as we start making more pandemic to pandemic number comparisons, similar to you're starting to see the budget reflect comparing those. And we were just 25% less than we were last March, which if you look at the bar graphs on page 2, 3, and 4 of that performance report, you really will see where the pandemic and capacity restrictions really started to take hold at really in the middle of March and starting in April was the big dip. So we're starting, like I said, to start comparing with the numbers we had, the big dip we had last year. And it was quite a bit better than it was last month in February. And that's really due to that week we had with the winter weather. People just weren't getting out and about. Service was a little restricted. So for about a week and a couple days, service was really limited. With that, I'll take any questions. So you guys can get on to your next agenda item.
Okay, appreciate the update, Taylor. Are there any questions or comments from members of the committee on this item? Okay, I'm not seeing any. I do have a couple things. I did receive an email from a constituent in Ward 7 who one of their friends, I guess, uses paratransit, and they were having a hard time. I think we've talked about this before, but a while back, but having a hard time scheduling because they, I guess, had used an online feature with CART, and that exact feature maybe doesn't exist anymore. I'm not sure, but they're not able to use the phone. And so they're having a hard time with the paratransit, and they had asked me about it, and I told them that I would bring it up in CPT since this is where we discuss it with staff and let you guys know about it and maybe get an update on that particular issue.
Yeah, happy to do so. We had a similar request very early on in our operations. And while Embark OKC actually has never offered that option of scheduling online for paratransit, we have actually made a reasonable accommodation for folks that need that. So I don't know if it's the same individual that we were working with, but Embark created an online form for them to fill out just for them. It wasn't open to the public. So that way they could schedule their trips more easily. The reason why it's not open to the public is because of the shared ride and, having to schedule it right when that person makes a request. That's an FTA regulation. It's hard to meet that regulation if you're fielding calls and getting those online requests and making sure that everybody gets the ride when they actually wanted it. Because if you don't meet that regulation, you can put them in another time slot. It's just you have to mark it down, and when FTA comes and audits you have to be able to show that report. So, but all that to say, if somebody's having issues and they need that accommodation, we will definitely make that for them. So feel free to send them to me and we'll get them set up.
Okay. Yeah, I will forward you that email.
Okay.
And, let people know that there is a way to address this. It might be different than what was happening before with CART, I guess. And so, but there still is a way that we can help people out here. So yeah, I'll send you that, and hopefully we can address that. I also, an upcoming issue that I wanted to bring up now was the summertime, and really anytime school is out. One of the issues that's come up since we took over the system is that some of the residents in Ward 7 specifically live in the South Campus area. I'm sure you're familiar, Taylor, with the Emerald Greens apartments and Crayotley and some other places down there. A lot of those folks, or many of them, do use the bus system. And before, when it was one whole system instead of two separate systems. So for those that don't know, ever since the city took over the public transit system, there's actually two separate transit systems operating. OU is continuing the operations of an on-campus bus route system, and then the city is operating or in charge of the rest of the city routes everywhere outside of campus. And the problem that's come up for some of the residents in Ward 7, at least in the South Campus area, is that we didn't have a city route that went down there. It was one of the campus routes, and it's one of the routes that OU has maintained running, and it connects to the Brook Street station, and you can get on a city route from there. But when school is out, OU hasn't been running the bus system on campus. And so the Emerald Greens is definitely an apartment complex that is very low income, I would describe. And there are definitely a lot of folks that don't have vehicles and walk or bike or rely on the bus. And that's something I have heard some feedback from on the campaign trail a few months ago. And then just over the last year or so since we took over the system, and since people realized that OU wasn't going to run the campus routes when OU's not in school. So that is one thing I would like for us to take a look at, how we might be able to address that during the summertime, especially since that's such a long period of time when there's no service on campus. I think winter break, a month or so is a long time as well. But that is just one kind of transit issue that I've been hearing about. That's kind of been a result of our changeover in the last 2 years. So just wanted to put that on your radar if you weren't already, if we hadn't already discussed it, I could not recall. So might have a discussion about that next month, about maybe some options for the summertime, if there's anything we can do to maybe help those folks out down there.
Yeah. If I can speak to it real quick, Councilman. I believe the issues we have are when OU is completely closed. So the couple weeks during winter break when nobody's on campus. So I'll circle back around to the CART employees, but I believe during the summer, while they don't operate full service, they do offer alternate service. And it's very similar to what we did when I was at OU. So they should still serve those areas. It just may not be as frequent or look the same as during the school months. But it's when campus is completely closed that they don't offer any service. Okay, that would definitely make some sense. And so maybe we can figure out some ways to maybe address that whenever that occurs. Sure. And I think there was some issues too because of COVID and campus closing down at certain points, people thinking I might not have a ride for a month or two now. And so anyway, that was definitely, again, just one thing that was kind of prominent on my radar with our transit system currently, since we're operating two separate ones, or not we, but that there are two separate ones operating. And so the other one too is I just wanted to update folks that don't know that currently the bus system in Norman is the city run routes are free fare and have been since we took over the system. And so I've seen some folks online commenting that they weren't aware that that was the case or didn't know what it costs to ride the bus. And so anybody watching, just want to make sure everybody's aware that it is free to ride the city bus in Norman. It's been free since we took it over. And so anybody that feels like there's any kind of stigma, or you're not sure, so you don't want to get on the bus and you don't have enough change or whatever it is, feel free to ride the city bus in Norman because it's currently free. So just want to make sure everybody is aware of that. Thank you, Taylor and city staff. I appreciate your update on this topic every month, and encourage all residents that are interested in this topic of public transit to contact your council members, contact me through the email on the website, and we'll be happy to ask any questions that you have about public transit in Norman, or make any requests if there's stops, if there's benches, shelters, anything that you notice out in the community that we could do better, or if you have any suggestions or compliments, let us know. So thank you. Thank you. And we will move on to the next item, which is a discussion regarding off-street parking requirements and potentially complementary city efforts, including engineering design criteria updates. And I believe we have staff to talk about that with us today.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to be back in a meeting. It's like you don't see anybody very much, but welcome. So yes, if you had the opportunity to read the memo, in the very beginning of the memo, we have an outline there regarding what efforts Dr. Evenson and her crew are working on for the green incentives. So if you have any questions about that first part of the memo, we're happy to talk about it. Carrie, if you want to give them a brief summary, that's great as well. I know really we want to be talking about parking, but I didn't want that to go unnoticed because they are continuing to work on that.
Yeah, and I would definitely agree that parking has a major impact on stormwater. So
Absolutely.
I believe they're absolutely related.
Yeah, and I'll just give you a little bit of information on where we're at with the EDC update. I'm Carrie Evenson, Stormwater Program Manager for the City of Norman. And I am, along with numerous other city staff, because it's really a citywide project, working on the EDC update because, it's been a while since we've done that and it needs to be done. And one of the things that we're doing as part of that is we're reviewing our requirements, we're reviewing our ordinance language as well to make sure we don't have any barriers to green infrastructure or low impact development in the city. And then we're also looking at ways, at council direction, at ways that we can incentivize the use of green infrastructure and the installation of green infrastructure across the city. And through this process, one of the things that our contractor, Friesen Nichols, has been tasked with is to look at ways that we can either modify our ordinances or put in some other requirements that, or avenues for folks to add green infrastructure, or we can incentivize it. And some of that is through potentially offering or allowing reduced parking, or landscaping requirements, things like that. And so that's part of the process that we're working through right now. Council approved the contract amendment with Friesen Nichols recently to begin phase 2, where we start to actually make the language changes to the EDC. And we are including external stakeholders, members of the community in that process right now. And that's where we are going to be looking at the parking requirements and looking at, is there a way that we can use those requirements to incentivize green infrastructure? And so that's kind of where this ties into this discussion that you're also having with Jane about what are our current parking requirements.
Thank you, Dr. Evenson. Appreciate that. See a hand up from Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Dr. Evenson. I'm curious about the stakeholder piece that you just mentioned. And so can you expand a little bit more on where we are on that? How are we identifying the stakeholders, roughly who they are? Because this seems like, well, first of all, I just want to say, I want to thank all of you for the staff report, because it was really helpful to me to get a summary of all of the different parts of this that have been ongoing for the last couple years. I think with having to cancel so many meetings this year that I had sort of lost track of all the moving pieces here. So this is really an excellent summary of all of the different things that we're taking under consideration. So I just did want to mention how appreciative I am of kind of getting focused back to where we are right now. So.
Absolutely. So with the external stakeholder group, basically we have talked to city staff to try to identify those builders, developers, engineers, contractors that frequently interact with the city and our engineering design criteria. And we have a list of folks that we've identified both in phase 1 and in response to some comments that we got from during the diagnostic report discussion to try to make that as complete as we can. And so I was just going through that today to send to Friesen Nichols so that we can start to contact those folks and begin those stakeholder meetings. We're going to divide up into smaller committees. And so there'll be some discussion on stormwater in a smaller group. There'll be discussion of traffic control in a smaller group, streets, development issues. And so we'll, depending on how the external stakeholders want to divide themselves, we'll divide up into those groups and have particular discussions on what we see as the changes are necessary to bring us up to date with technology and materials and things like that. Some other issues that we and they have run into throughout the development process, some things that need to be tweaked. And then we'll have those discussions and then hopefully have a finished product to you in about a year or so with those changes and get that moving forward.
So are you anticipating, will those be virtual meetings, in-person meetings yet to be determined? And like, how many people are we talking about?
Yeah, so it's still to be determined as far as how we're going to do those meetings. It may end up being kind of a hybrid, which a lot of our meetings are going to now, where there are some people in the room and there are other people who are not yet comfortable being in the room that we can bring in virtually. Or if they're, out of state or out of town or whatever at the time, they can always Zoom in and join us that way. So we're still working that out. And let's see, I didn't put a count to the list right now, but I would guess between 25 and 30 people have been identified. Now we'll split up into smaller groups to make that a little bit more manageable, but we have quite a few people on there. And there are private citizens as well that, particularly on the stormwater side, that have knowledge of stormwater and want to be involved on that and have reached out and asked.
Okay, excellent. I really, I like the fact that we have a large group and that we will have the ability to, really focus in on certain categories. So that sounds good. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Hall. Was Jane going to speak before we had that question?
Well, no, I was just going to go over the rest of the discussion, but I didn't want to, if anybody else has their hand up, I was trying to look at the screens here to see.
I don't see any other hands up.
Okay. So moving forward into the discussion, parking has always been a hot topic, and how much someone needs or how much, they don't need. But I really, I put the memo together. Dr. Evenson, thank you so much for all the information you gave me on your update and everything. But I really wanted this to be an opportunity for us to just really have a lot of dialogue and figure out which direction you really want to go with this. I visited with legal on this as well. And so, we can look at the possibility of taking the required parking that's in the ordinance right now, and we can establish that as a recommended maximum. One thing that does concern me about that, and I don't really think we would run into this because it would negatively impact someone's business if they tried to short themselves on parking. Well, parking space is about $6,000, I think, per parking space. So, it does get expensive when you're, developing an entire parking lot. So someone would look to save money and cut back on their parking and everything. But again, if they do, that's going to negatively impact their business. And I don't think somebody's really going to want to do that. So, I just wanted to have this discussion and see what you thought. Do you like the idea of making that a recommended maximum? And then if someone does need additional parking, they can submit a request to staff. One of the ideas I had was that, if someone can demonstrate through a request, through a memo that they would submit to city staff, and we could take that to our development review team, which is the same DRT that reviews the preliminary plats, certificates of survey, and stuff like that come forward for development. So everybody that's on that committee is already very familiar with how a parking lot, the runoff and everything would need to be accommodated for if someone was wanting to go over what we've established in the zoning code as their recommended maximum. So I guess I want to open it up and see what questions you have and thoughts you have from the memo and see which direction you want to go.
Thank you. Thank you, Jane. For me, I mean, we've talked about this issue before. It's come up in various council discussions over the years, and I know Councilor Peacock has had this one, one of the top issues on his agenda to address. And so, from my standpoint, I want us to be in a position where nobody in Norman ever says, "Well, I only have that much parking because the city made me do it." Like, I want that to not be a factor, basically, is the goal I have of that the city hasn't made somebody put in an excessive amount of parking for the type of business they have. Or I know businesses can change based on buildings and all that stuff.
Absolutely.
But I'm looking for something that we're not requiring a lot of parking, that people can apply to have more of it, or make the case for why they need more of it than if we have a minimum or a maximum, why they would need more. But I would like to see a way that parking, I would rather save a tree than meet a parking standard. Like, so they're going to get rid of the tree because they have to fit this many parking spaces on there. And I know it can be a headache in some places where there's not very much parking, but in the places in Norman where parking is limited, those are the most attractive and active, and we're able to charge money for the parking spots because they're so valuable. And so that's kind of been my thought over the years about where I wanted to get with parking in Norman, was that the city's not the ones responsible if there's a giant parking lot. And if there is a really giant parking lot, then there was a good reason or a stated reason for that, and that we have best practices to reduce the impact of all that impervious surface and things like that. So those are kind of my thoughts on it. And I think Councilmember Peacock has a few of his own. So yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. This is a subject that I have a lot of strong opinions on. So I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time. I think we're talking about maximums right now, but to me, the important switch is to get rid of the minimum requirements. We as a city, I don't think we shouldn't be in the business of telling the market how to function. We shouldn't be telling developers that you need to buy X amount of land for your building, X amount of land for the parking, and then X amount of land for the stormwater solution to offset the parking that we required. I think right now we're seeing the product of that, and then we're only getting, large corporations, large parcel projects, because those are the only entities that can really build according to our ordinance. So, this subject touches on so many things for me, and it's stormwater we've talked about, but also sales tax collection, walkability, urbanism, density. It really checks a lot of boxes. So I think every day that we wait to amend this or to make a change, we're only doing ourselves a disservice. Like I said, I know we're talking about maximums, but to me, the crux of the issue is the minimums. So if we could just change the required minimums to be recommended minimums, I think that's a great first step. And then that gives us the time to kind of, tease out some of the variables for the maximums. So, I've got a lot more thoughts. I've got a lot of graphics that I can show. I'm happy to share my screen and kind of go through some of this stuff, but I don't want to dominate the conversation. So I'm happy to open it up to somebody else or answer questions or whatever.
Any other committee members have questions about this? Yes, Councilmember Hall.
Okay, so yes, Councilmember Peacock, let's see those graphics of how much parking lot and concrete we have in Norman, Oklahoma, because I know you've already shared those with me. So let's just start there.
Well, this is University of North Park. You can see up here, this is going to be Target. This is going to be Crest. You can see our parking to retail footprint is literally 3 to 1. So not only is there a massive stormwater implication there, but it's sales tax collections. You just think all of that real estate that we've given up to something that has no return on investment. Jane threw out a $6,000 per spot, a figure there, and just look at the amount of money that we've put into infrastructure that really, like I said, has no return. And not only that, you look at the distance created between the buildings now. So when we're talking about public infrastructure, roads, water, sewer, just the distance we have to go now to start connecting our places, that's the crux of the issue for me. Is the city is the one who's responsible for maintaining all that stuff. It's not the private businesses. It's not any of these landowners. It's the city. So when we're looking 20, 30 years down the road on replacement costs, every mile of water line, sewer line, roadway that we've created that we have to maintain, that's something that's affecting our dollar line, our bottom line in the general fund. So I think there's a real financial argument to be made there. I put together another quick little graphic that shows basically what our current ordinance requires and what size building you're actually able to put in per the parking ordinance. So you can see, office, retail, restaurant, bar. The thing that really stands out to me is that I hate to say we're advocating, but we're really setting it up, or we're promoting drunk driving with this ordinance by saying that we're requiring 64 spaces around a 3,200 square foot bar. That right there is the most egregious one. But you can go and start to look at how any developer is going to come in there. To get a 10,000 square foot office in, you've got to have a 30,000 square foot lot, and that doesn't even account for the stormwater solution. So really, we're talking about you're probably only going to be able to fit in a 5,000 square foot office on a 30,000 square foot lot. So, to me, it's pretty black and white. It's pretty straightforward of what the issue is and what the negative fallout is. But again, I want this to be a discussion, so I'm interested to hear everybody else's thoughts. I'll leave this up on the screen.
Thank you, Councilor Peacock. I can't see everybody else though, unfortunately.
Okay, let me stop sharing then.
Yeah, that's pretty helpful right there. And I'm definitely surprised about the bar thing as well. Something I noticed recently, actually, over in Ward 8 on Tecumseh Road by the Healthplex. I was visiting that new Wendy's over there. And I pulled into the Dental Depot next door to eat the meal I just got. And I don't know if the Dental Depot is closed or not, but there weren't any cars in the parking lot, but the entire building is surrounded by parking. I'm kind of surprised it's like just all parking. And I couldn't imagine that Dental Depot needed that much parking. I know the one on Main Street doesn't have that much. And I know that was an older existing parcel and they rebuilt on it. It's not as big as a new greenfield development, but I don't want to require more parking just because it's a greenfield that's got endless space to, theoretically to build in compared to building in central Norman. So yeah, and I agree about the bar issue too. Requiring a lot of parking at a bar does seem counterintuitive. The deli, for example, being on Campus Corner, there of course is parking on Campus Corner, but a lot of people that come to the deli, there's 2 parking spots in the front on White Street that are parallel, and that's it. So you've got to walk, either from your house in one of the neighborhoods around, or you're getting a taxi, an Uber, or your friends all came down there. That's what I see a lot down there working when I've been working. Is a lot of people walking in because I can't tell you how many people I've seen that just cannot do the parallel parking right there. I've seen so many people over the years make the attempt, they stop, they sort of back up and then quickly realize, I don't think I can do it, and go on. So yeah, I would not want to be incentivizing or requiring that a small building be completely surrounded by a parking lot. Unless that applicant made, some sort of case for, why they needed that much. So I definitely agree with Councilor Peacock, and would want to see maybe some follow-up meeting, maybe come back next month with some possible changes that maybe we've seen some other cities do, maybe some, like we often do, look at some of the Big 12 cities, some of the other college towns like Norman, Boulder and Lawrence and others, that maybe they've developed some policy on this that we can look at and get some suggestions, or at least something to look at, and then continue the discussion. I see Councilor Hall's hand up.
So yeah, I was really looking forward to this agenda item, and there's been a lot of discussion, as we've been reminded from the staff report, and I can remember the conversations that we had a few years ago about just the LID, all the things that Dr. Evenson just outlined with the changing times that we're in, and having all of this excessive parking that we all recognize and can see and drive by all the time. And so yes, I'm in support, the same as Councilmember Peacock and Holman, on addressing these issues, which we're certainly in the middle of, and we're addressing with investing our money with working with the consultant on the engineering design standards. So definitely interested in pursuing all that. The other interesting aspect of all of this to me is just the shifting attitudes of what people are looking for and what they want. And, we have talked in many meetings over the last few years about placemaking and being a walkable city, and walk scores, and multimodal transportation, and all those things. And you touched on it a little in your report, Ms. Hudson, but looking forward over the next 10 years, the way we use cars and the need for the kind of parking we had in the past, I believe is really going to change dramatically. And you raised a really good point, Councilmember Holman, about even college students and how comfortable they are with ride shares, and not having a car, and calling to get rides home when they've been out late or they've been at the bar. And so I think we have, the way people move themselves around is definitely changing, and we're definitely in transition. And so, fully in support of continuing this conversation. The other thing I wanted to throw out there, because Ms. Hudson and I actually had this conversation yesterday, is when we're considering, however we move ahead to reduce the number of parking places, which I think we're all interested in and in support of. We also have a very interesting conundrum with our Center City form-based code in Core Norman. And we have struggled mightily to hit the sweet spot on the number of parking spaces required for the kind of single housing type that we're getting, that we're just kind of in conflict, because we want less parking, yet we're requiring developers to basically just cover their lots with impervious surfaces to make room for cars, and having the need for a walkable urban core, but also parking your car or truck once and getting out of your car. So I also want to be mindful of whatever kind of changes, how that's going to impact this, I would say, peculiar boundary that we have in Core Norman, and what those parking minimums and maximums are going to look like, which also get into the discussion of off-street parking and the need for parking structures in Core Norman, which we've recognized for years. And finally, we have Cleveland County, gratefully, that will probably be coming forward with a parking structure fairly soon, but I think we recognize the need for that. And I know there's been some discussion about having a parking authority that can, maybe create the parking structures that we need in the urban core that would also reduce the impervious surface and the number of parking places that we have just at the ground level. So these are all the kinds of things that I'm thinking about as well. And, definitely the ultimate goal would be to reduce the number of parking places. And I know we're in the middle of a pretty big, giant study. And I know we've had updates time to time, but I'm thinking maybe it would be useful to also have an update from our consultants concerning where we are in phase 1 and phase 2, and maybe some of the things that they are discovering that they could share with us right now that might help us define how we move forward.
Thank you, Councilmember Hall. I absolutely agree as well, and especially about Center City. One of the major topics of Center City in the beginning was trying to reduce the number of parking lots between Campus Corner and Main Street, and in trying to encourage the people that own those parking lots to, over time, build on them, build apartments, build homes, build retail, commercial storefronts, but almost anything but parking lots. When First Baptist was the biggest one that people talked about during the charrette process, because it is the kind of biggest parking lot in between Campus Corner and Main Street. And just what would it take for one day for them to build onto that parking lot and help better connect the areas? Because like Councilmember Peacock pointed out in his slide, parking creates massive distance between buildings, and buildings are where people are at. And what we talked about in Center City years ago is how, the consultants we brought in, they talked about how, walking from Campus Corner to Main Street was not particularly enticing to a lot of people, even though it was only 6 blocks. It's only a 5 to 10 minute walk, but it's not particularly well lit in between. And there are several empty parking lots. At nighttime, they're completely empty. They're not used at all. The church ones and a couple other ones that have just been around. And so, what the consultants talked about was, that somebody's not going to walk from Campus Corner to Main Street down Asp when there's 3 or 4 very large, empty, dark parking lots in between. And there's no activity, there's no storefronts, there's no, stoops from apartments or, houses. And so getting those parking lots reduced and filled with, usable space, buildings and activity is definitely a goal in Center City, but also is really relevant in suburban parts of the city. As Councilor Peacock's slide shows, is one of the major problems with suburban development over the last 50, 60 years is the spreading out of everything. You'll build a whole building just for one thing and then have a whole bunch of parking around it. And then there'll be another building just for one thing. Instead of having a whole long, like we have on Main Street, from block to block, the buildings go from one block to the other. And then there's a whole bunch of different storefronts, and, it's all connected. And, but at places like UMP, people don't generally walk from Target over to any other store, really. People, if they go to Target, if they have anywhere else to go in the UMP, they're going to get back in their car and they're going to drive to it because the distance is so far. And the perception of distance is very far in areas like that, because the buildings are so set back from the street because of the massive parking lots that separate the street from the buildings and then in between the buildings. And then when you're out there on a human scale, everything looks like it's very far away, farther than you would feel comfortable walking on a not perfect weather day. And so I think urban and suburban parking issues are similar in a lot of ways and have their own issues in a lot of ways too. And so I definitely would like for us to continue this discussion next month. And if possible, if staff needs staff, let us know what you might need when it comes to finding some other examples on policy. And I would encourage other committee members, I'm sure Councilmember Peacock and Hall might have some suggestions too for policy for staff that they could put together and present to us next time or whenever staff might be ready.
So can I ask a question real quick?
Please.
I'm sorry, you still have your hands up, but I wanted to ask a question real quick. So in doing the research that I've done, just a little bit so far, just as an example, so our office parking is actually less than what I was seeing as a national average when I was reading one of the articles. So I just want to clarify, is one of the ideas that you have is, possibly cutting the parking requirement that's in the zoning ordinance right now? I mean, are you looking at cutting it in half? Or are you, because with what we're saying, when we say the recommended maximum, they don't have to put that many in. That's just the maximum that we would let them go to with this change. But you're wanting to see it actually,
I think,
cut in half?
well, I don't know about necessarily in half. I'll call on the other council members about it, but I don't know about necessarily half. And necessarily what that number would be. But I definitely want to make sure that we're not encouraging them to build more, and that our recommended max is not, maybe is that too high? And if we say, well, you can build up to this much, and people just say, okay, I'll build up to that much. And maybe it's not necessary to build up to whatever that is. So Councilor Peacock.
Yeah, this is kind of where I think my vision is a little different. I want to make the minimums the recommendations. So there's no required minimum. But on the max, I want that to be a hard cap. And every space you build over that hard cap, you pay a luxury fee. And that luxury fee goes into stormwater or some other, community fund. And, there's offsetting mechanisms to that. If you install X amount of bike spaces or X amount of electric vehicle charging stations or whatever, there's ways to offset the maximum cap, but that hard maximum is to keep from what we just saw in University North Park for Target from building 1,000 spaces, because I guarantee you they have a corporate policy that says they know how many spaces they need to make that development work. And they build however much we let them build, which is kind of an infinite amount right now. So kind of further to that point, stores, churches, they're usually designed for kind of that worst case scenario, whether that's Black Friday in terms of retail, or that's Christmas Day in terms of a church. They've built their lot to accommodate that one day of the year, and the rest of the year it's at 50%, 75%. So yes, minimums recommended, but I'd like to throttle those minimums as well to bring them down quite a bit, because I think they're still overbuilt. I think in the staff report it said something like there's 3.5 parking spaces for every car in America. So to me, that means we're 3.5 times overbuilt in our parking infrastructure. There's a couple other things. Sorry, I'm going to get on my soapbox for a second.
Go for it.
There's this myth out there that, if you don't have enough parking, people won't come to your establishment. And I think that's the furthest thing from the truth. I think if your draw is enough of a draw, people will find a way to park and walk there. I think OU football is a perfect example of this. We don't have massive parking lots around the stadium. People still find a way to get 100,000 people in there. I think in terms of Ed Noble Parkway, Sooner Mall, once you repeal these required minimums, that just opens up all of that parking space for redevelopment. So you think of a thing like the mall, which is struggling and dying right now. If you were able to infuse the perimeter around the mall with, say, multifamily or some other use that essentially doubles the usable square footage of that area, then I think that's a really good approach to kind of saving the mall. Ed Noble Parkway is the same idea. If you're able to take all that wasted parking and put some other use in there, once those minimums are no longer required, it just opens up a whole nother redevelopment opportunity. And Councilmember Hall, you spoke to kind of one of my favorite new things is the future of the car and self-car ownership. I think with the rise of autonomous vehicles and electric vehicles, we're just going to see single car ownership just, I think, plummet over the next decade or two. And the need to build parking lots at the scale we've built them is going to be a thing of the past, and quickly, in my opinion. I might be kind of a future thinker in that terms, but I really think it's coming quicker than we realize. So.
Thank you, Councilmember Peacock. I agree. I do want to get away from the minimums and more have a policy that's geared towards encouraging maximums. And when it comes to minimum parking, in being able to evaluate projects individually, that maybe this building doesn't need all this parking, this minimum amount. It's so, and I know you have issues when an area doesn't have enough parking, people want more parking. But like I said, I think the best places are always the places that don't have it available everywhere. And where I think a building, I know for a fact, a building in a location generates a lot more revenue and activity than a parking lot does. And so I would absolutely agree. I'd like to see focus on no minimums necessarily and focusing on maximums. And if people want to go over that maximum, I would agree with that as well. That a reason and maybe there is a fee that you'd have to pay into in order to have to be able to go over whatever the maximum may be. So let's see. Any other comments or questions from committee?
That's the part I think that you really need to have a lot of community buy-in or developer buy-in from, because I don't want to create a condition that disincentivizes people from wanting to come here and starting a business. But the idea is that you lower the barrier to entry so that we're able to get more small developers, small local entrepreneurs building buildings, and not just in the core area, but as you alluded to, kind of curbing that sprawl that we're seeing on the periphery everywhere in the community. I think somebody like Councilmember Nash and how it pertains to Ward 5, I think that's a really hot topic. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, actually.
Well, and I was going to mention too, and I know you and Councilor Hall are familiar with Strong Towns, and every Black Friday they do a photo series where they go around the nation and they set up a lawn chair in a parking lot of a big box retail store, and they take pictures of how empty it is, even on Black Friday. So that's just a fun thing they do every year to show that we've overbuilt parking in the United States. Even on the busiest day of the year, we have parking lots that are so massive that they never get full. So or never even get close. So Councilmember Hall.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I was thinking about that too. And, what a dramatic visual display that is on the busiest days of the year. And, I know we've talked, well, you already brought up Councilmember Peacock about University North Park and the massive, massive parking lots around Crest and why it turned out that way. And so I really support the direction that all of this is going. And I really like the idea of the incentives being tied to green infrastructure and LID.
Yes.
If you do those things, you might be able to do something else. We actually built that into some of the amendments with Center City Form-Based Code. And I definitely like that direction as far as incentivizing. And I just wanted to talk about two particular instances that came to mind about the parking dilemmas that we have. And, the kind of urban legend about Campus Corner is that there's no place to park. And the city invested in a city lot a couple of years ago, very convenient, right there. You don't have to walk any farther than driving up to a business. And, it's not very heavily utilized. And it's a great asset to have to Campus Corner, but we still have that mental idea that it's really hard to park on Campus Corner, and it really isn't. And this is pre-COVID, we've had a crazy year where we can't use anything as an example. But the other thing that the development that I'm seeing again in Center City that I think is just completely counter to what we're trying to accomplish and talk about today, is a very recent practice that we're seeing and that the planning department is seeing, where the very place where we want to increase density and have that active sidewalk, we now have developers that are tearing down structures and putting a parking lot instead next to, a 3-story unit. And this is coming up more and more and more. And so this is a really good time to be, recognizing that the way we're doing it right now is not actually getting the result that we want.
Thank you, Councilmember Hall. I appreciate that. And in regard to UMP as well, and I'll call him Mayor Clark, I feel some real regret about our recent decision to build that new parking lot at Legacy Park. I felt that Legacy Park did need ADA parking, but every time I've seen people post about or complain about a lack of parking at Legacy Park, it really just drives me crazy, because there, outside of Lloyd Noble Center, there is nowhere else in the city of Norman that has more parking around it than Legacy Park. And it's a less than 2-minute walk from the parking lot in front of Academy over to the park. And that park had limited green space, and we had to take some of the very limited green space that park had and add a new parking lot to it, which has several ADA spaces, which again, we did need over there, but there's most of the spaces are not ADA, they're just regular parking spaces. So people could park an extra 50 feet or whatever closer to the park. I mean, so that's something that's kind of had me feeling upset lately. I did vote for it, but I've felt regret about it actually every time I drive down the interstate and I look at it, and I hardly ever see anybody park there since we built it. And so that's kind of the stuff I do want to get away from, is this perception that the parking, we have to have a whole lot of it and it's got to be right in front of whatever you're trying to go to. So anyway, Mayor Clark, you had your hand up.
I really appreciate the conversation, and Councilor Peacock, I like your suggestions. I'm sure there will be some pushback, so creating buy-in is going to be very important. I do like that we're creating parking garages, but you've all touched on many things. The only thing that I would add would be that as we come out of COVID-19, it's a different world. And you guys have touched on the vehicles, but also like curbside. People aren't, they want the convenience. So I think that is another reason to be forward thinking in how we offer parking. I know that, this is how we've always done it, and we're going to get a lot of that, but it's just different now. And the next generation expects it to be different. And I think the college students do as well. So I'm excited to see the continued conversation on this.
I'll just draw one more quick example, but Oklahoma City, downtown Oklahoma City, they did their streetcar, and really the idea with that wasn't really to get cars off the street. It was that when you come to Oklahoma City, you park your car once, you stay in downtown Oklahoma City, you get on a streetcar, and you spend all your sales tax dollars in downtown Oklahoma City. You never get in your car and you leave. So to me, that is kind of the goal in the future of, the long-term vision of this, is that we've incentivized people so much to not drive their car that they're instead now walking from place to place or getting in a ride share and just staying in this community and spending their tax dollars in this community, not driving north to the city that, well, I won't mention it.
Well, I think you made a good point, Mayor Clark, about curbside, a increase in curbside services, so quick in and out. And also, we've talked about this before on Campus Corner, the ride share. There have been some real issues with the increase in ride share, which is a good thing. But what we've seen on Campus Corner, and I see it anytime I work at the deli, is that it's a little bit chaotic because they'll just be Uber or Lyft just stop right in the middle of the road, put their hazards on, and they'll wait there, and there's cars behind them and they're honking at them, and there's no designated places. We don't have infrastructure or lanes or dedicated spots or anything like that to address this type of thing. We've dealt with similar issues with the scooters and these different ways that people are moving around and getting their services delivered to them as well. And so, it's absolutely right that things like the way we've always done them may not translate very well into the way we're seeing things change. Councilor Hall.
The last thing I'll say, I promise the last thing I'll say. It's why main streets are so attractive. It's because they were built before the automobile was really a thing. I mean, at least before, massive car ownership was a thing. So you look at how buildings on Main Street literally share bricks. They are built on top of each other. There's no room for the space in between. So that is the kind of walkable, healthy, active sidewalk environment that I'm looking to create all across the city, not just in the core area.
Absolutely. Councilor Hall.
Well, I was just going to add to your comments, Councilmember Holman, about the rideshare thing, and that there's actually been several different plans considered on Campus Corner that, to my knowledge, has not really been implemented yet. And one of those being using that city lot as the drop off and pickup point, but that takes buy-in from the Campus Corner merchants. But I think that's a point well taken, as well as you, Mayor Clark. I mean, we are entering into a whole new world now, and the way that we're going to go to work and play and all of those things is being altered dramatically. And we just need to really be mindful of that. And these rideshare services, driverless cars, all of the things that are coming, I think we're definitely in a transition, and we need to be looking forward to make sure that we're ready to make those transitions as smoothly as we can.
Councilmember Nash.
Yeah. How do the parking regulations, how do they vary with situations where you have businesses next door to each other that might share a parking spot? Does that have any effect on the maximum, or does every business in that strip have to have its individual maximum?
To me, it absolutely factors into the equation. I think that's what we want. I think we want shared parking for all our businesses. Again, it's incentivizing, maybe disincentivizing is a better word, businesses from building these massive lots and actually finding a way to be cooperative with their neighbors.
And do we have any language in our ordinances that limit those scenarios?
No, not in the standard parking regulations. Within the mixed use zoning ordinance, there is a chart for shared parking. But as it stands right now, if you have a strip mall, we're looking at the uses that are within that strip mall, and do you have enough parking to accommodate those uses within the strip mall?
Currently, though, like on Campus Corner and on Main Street, Volare is a good example of a new building that's taller than the building that was there before. There still is only one business that operates in it, but it's a 4-story building compared to the 1-story building that was there before it. And because it's a commercial building, it did not require any additional parking. The developer or the owner did not have to build more parking somewhere on Campus Corner or parking lot. They didn't have to contribute to any kind of parking fee or system. So where they're at, like basically you could build Devon Tower in the middle of Campus Corner without adding any additional parking, as long as it was just a commercial building. And so that's kind of, but if you wanted to build a strip mall on a green space, like Ms. Hudson was saying, you've got to build enough parking for each individual storefront at basically what could be in there, instead of the, less parking and just assuming that they'll all share that parking like we do on Main Street, Campus Corner.
Yeah, the areas.
I mean, yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, so Main Street and some of the areas on Gray and some of the side streets, as well as the Campus Corner area, those are all zone C3. And so within the zoning ordinance, those districts zoned C3, they don't have a parking requirement because of the on-street parking that has historically been in place.
Councilor Hall.
Well, I also was just thinking, many of us attended the groundbreaking today for the Noun Hotel, which is going to be a 92-room hotel with a restaurant. And literally that property will have 0 parking places. And it's a great example of shared parking because, to make that work, they have a long-term lease with the First Presbyterian Church, who really only needs their parking lot on Sundays and for, smaller meetings held during the week. And so that hotel is completely dependent on shared parking.
Absolutely. Okay. Any other comments, questions from committee members? I don't see any currently. So I think, like I said, continue this discussion, maybe have some potential policy changes that we want to maybe advance after the next meeting. If, like I said, if any committee members want to send staff whatever suggestions or research you might have about what you want to see, and then we can get some further suggestions from staff about what they might have seen around. And then maybe after the next meeting, we can move some suggestions onto the full council and we can get some changes made. Is that Councilmember or Mayor Carter?
One quick note, which we have no control over, but just wanted to throw out there as we're daydreaming about our potential for changing parking for the better. Some universities don't allow freshmen to bring cars.
Yep.
I don't.
Well, you used to not to back in the day.
So I don't know. I dare to dream. Just wanted to share that in case you didn't know that existed.
Well, the way I understand it, part of the history of Campus Corner and why it even exists is because in the early days of OU, students, I mean, back then, a lot of families wouldn't have had multiple cars anyway, but that students weren't allowed to have cars. And since a lot of the student housing and fraternities and sororities were over where Campus Corner is currently, that it developed into an entertainment district because nobody had cars. And Main Street was just a few blocks further away from campus, I guess, and people wanted to travel back then too. So, okay, well, I think we've covered today. We're given some good direction, I think, for staff, and hopefully we can continue this conversation either next month. I will wait for staff if they feel like more time might be needed on their end to bring some stuff forward, but tentatively maybe we'll plan on CPT next month, following up, and then if we can come to any consensus, maybe we end up moving some stuff forward from there. So anything else, any other comments, questions from committee staff? Okay. And the last item on the agenda is just miscellaneous comments. Is there anything from anybody? Anybody have anything? Not seeing anything? Okay. Well, in that case, I appreciate everybody being here this afternoon. I appreciate staff and all your work keeping us up to date on these committees, and it definitely is exciting to get back into this. I'm looking forward to when we'll start being able to meet in person again and all that as well. So thanks everybody for watching at home. And remember, if public transit or any of these issues are important to you, please tune in the third Thursday of the month at 4 p.m. And contact your council member, contact me, even if I'm not your council member, since I'm the chair of the committee, and we will be more than happy to discuss any issues you might have noticed or be having, or if you just have any questions or anything that might be going on, this is the committee for you. So, all right. Well, thank you, everybody. This meeting is adjourned, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.